I would worry about also holding assets that are not prone to deflate.
In today's video, Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Associates, discusses where we are in the changing world order, the macroeconomic outlook, and the rising tensions between the US and China.
I think a lot of people are wondering what the hell is going on with debt right now in our country. So how did we get here, and why is this a big problem?
Creating credit stimulates, and everybody wants everything to go up. So whenever you get a bad situation, you get this very heavy dose of stimulation, which is credit, making available. But credit produces debt, and debt is an obligation to pay back. And so it builds up over a long period of time. And then in the recent times, we had 2008 and we had now the COVID. There was a desire to give people a lot of money, but there was no ability to get that money from someplace. So they created a lot of debt as a big stimulation and printed a lot of money to make that easier to pay that debt. And so that's why everything goes up in relationship to depreciated value. The lesson there, by the way, is don't hold dead assets. One man's debts are another man's assets.
Sure.
So when you hold a bond or a money market fund, you're going to get an interest rate which is substantially below the inflation rate, so you'll lose buying power. I would worry about also holding assets that are not prone to deflate, to do badly by losing buying power relative to inflation, so inflation-protected assets.
In your opinion, where does the current version of capitalism fall short?
It falls short in delivering the basic results. I'm a capitalist in a sense. I believe in capitalism, but I think everything's got to be reformed to produce the outcome that you want. Bottom 60% of the population has not had a rise in per capita income, living standards, since 1980. And we are producing these wealth gaps, as which you point out. And that is because the profit system doesn't do it all. There are things such as education levels, civility between people, and so on, that are creating opportunity gaps. And this has been true in history, that those who have more money have more benefits, more advantages. If you have more money, you can guarantee that you can educate your children better, which gives them a leg up. So the American dream, which I grew up with, was having parents who would raise you well. I had two parents who loved me. I went to a public school. It was a good public school. And I came out to a world of equal opportunity. And that's narrowing. Those opportunities are narrowing a lot, and the United States isn't as rich. It's more in debt than rich. And so those are the challenges. And so we're seeing it politically. We're seeing it where extremism in the politics has become greater. The populists of the right and the populists of the left, just like through history, they're fighting with each other, and we might be in a situation where what they want is more important to them than the system. The causes that people are behind are more important than the system. The system is in jeopardy. So one could imagine that neither side would accept losing in the elections, perhaps the 2024 elections, and you have this conflict. These gaps are a big risk, and it requires radical reforms in order to rectify those things. But right now, everybody's at each other's throats, as you're saying.
Would you say something like a billionaire tax is kind of just a red herring for bigger problems that aren't addressing the underlying issues?
Well, I think that there needs to be a transfer of wealth. That's going to have to come significantly from taxes, and the wealthy can pay for it better. And so I think that's inevitable that would and should come. Now, the form of the tax is a different question. How does it work? If you have a wealth tax, let's say a billionaire's and you try to tax it, there are technical problems with that, because how do you tax, let's say, wealth? Well, when you have a wealth tax, that requires you to be able to value all those assets. Some of those assets are not easy to value. What's your home? What's
They're a
your
liquid.
They're and then there's also they're a liquid, and illiquid means, well, where do you get the cash to pay your taxes? So there are barriers to certain types of taxes. Inheritance taxes, if you're going to try to make a wealth tax, is a more effective way of bringing about. Our generation, my generation, has borrowed a lot of money and left the next generation, your generation, with a broken down infrastructure and having borrowed a lot of money. And so that's a problem. Let me clarify.
Sure.
It is inevitable that for the foreseeable future, that China will be a comparable power, let's call it. Stronger in some ways, less strong in other ways. And that it is likely that it will pass the United States, but not certain. It'll all depend on how strong the United States is by taking care of itself. But anyway, to give you numbers, you asked for that. China has a population which is more than 4 times the size of the United States. So if it had a per capita income, which was half the United States, it would be twice as large economically. And it's been growing at a fast pace. Since I've been going there in 1984, its per capita income has increased by 26 times.
Wow.
Okay, so it is growing, sort of maybe more potential to grow. So we know that we can't discount China, and we know that we're in a different world than in the early years of me growing up, when the United States was the dominant power. So we know that we're going to have that great power conflict. We either better get stronger or expect that we have to deal with that power conflict, ideally in a way that does not produce a military war.
You mentioned China's population growth. Do you see maybe their aging population or other things like their opaque financial markets, or they also have several controversial social problems that they're dealing with on their own? Do you see these as potential threats to China?
China has problems that you're referring to. For example, the demographics, particularly with the one-child policy, meant that it used to be that there were kids taking care of the parents. But
Sure.
Now we have one child, 2 parents, and at the same time as you're taking care of your children, and that's more than is possible. So the demographic issue is an important issue in China. It has a number of challenges, but we also have a number of challenges. In any case, it's likely that they will grow at a faster pace than we will grow at, despite those challenges, because they are being very productive.
What do you lose when you lose that top spot on the throne?
I think that top spot is way exaggerated as being important. I mean, to some extent, you can control things more when you're in the top spot. The going to war and leading those wars is terribly dangerous, and also maintaining that top spot is very costly. Like, for example, the United States has bases in 70 countries. That's costly, and so that's a challenge. History has shown that economically and in many respects, the best position is to be a neutral country in a war. Being number one brings with it problems too. I think we're relatively late in the cycle and declining in the following sense. We are, let's say, at the brink. We're close to this. Now, that doesn't mean it's inevitable. Really, it all comes down to how we are with each other. The world has more resources or wealth than it ever had. And if there's peace and working together to deal with the sharing of the wealth and the opportunities in certain ways, you can avoid wars, internal and external.